Welcome to What's My Thesis. I'm Javier Proenza, and today my guest is Oscar Pearson. You're telling me you're in Seattle and you haven't been there that long?
Yeah, I've been in Seattle for a month and a half about.
I can tell you right now that you have a much stronger constitution than I do, because even in Florida, when it rains, I get depressed. So, California is perfect because it never rains. I spent a month in Barcelona, and it was in April, which apparently is like their June gloom. We have a thing called June gloom where it's like cloudy all the time. And when I got back to LA, I just laid in my girlfriend's apartment, like looking out the window at just the blue sky, kind of like,
Yeah, so many clear days, so many sunny days in California. You can't
How are you
beat that.
adjusting to it? Is it as bad as people say?
I don't think so, but it's early on, so we still
Where are
got
you from originally?
several months of gray coming. I'm from the southern San Luis Obispo County in California.
Oh, okay.
We call it the Central Coast. And there's these 5 little cities in the southern part of San Luis Obispo County, these little beach cities. And I'm from those 5 cities, Grover Beach, Pismo Beach, Oceano, these little beach towns.
I know Pismo Beach from Bugs Bunny. I think he's always referencing them, or was always referencing them, along with other problematic things that I didn't notice as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah, Pismo's the name for sure.
San Luis Obispo is pretty famous too, right? I guess is that the general area, or is that another city? That's the county.
And it's a city, yeah. It's a college town. There's a Cal Poly there and stuff.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I usually start asking people about their background and when they started to realize art was a thing for them, because to me, that is always such a unique experience, Yeah. How do you, especially because I grew up in Italy and it was really easy to see art there.
Oh, okay.
And get inspired by it. So when people out here are getting into stuff, I'm always curious what it is that triggers it for them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really good question. A good thing to it tells you a lot, I think, or it gives you a little clues about where somebody's coming from and why they do what they do. I mean, I think about it just to try to figure out myself and why I'm interested in what I'm interested in. I think there was a couple things for me. Both of my grandmothers were very creative, painted, did kind of folk art kind of stuff, but also kind of Sunday painter kind of things,
like plein air kind of thing.
Maybe a little bit, but one of my grandmothers just was she was a school teacher her life, but when she retired and when I remember her, she had a lot of paintings. She really liked Georgia O'Keeffe. She really liked some of these modern painters, and she would kind of do these sort of modernist little flower paintings and stuff.
So it sounds like they weren't just doing it as a hobby, but they kind of had a background in art history, or some knowledge of art history, right?
I think, yeah, that grandma did. The other one was a little more just on the holidays, would paint paintings on the sliding glass door and stuff.
Oh,
and
cool.
Would get into Halloween decorations, handmade costume and stuff like that. So that was kind of the first thing. And then my dad is a pretty good amateur. I mean, I say that just because he was never he never did it for a living or anything, but he's good at drawing, and he would draw with me when I was a kid. And we would just he kind of just showed that that's a thing you can do for fun. Yeah. and like taught me some things through that. And so it was always like,
what kind of stuff did he draw? Was it like cartoons?
he
Was it
would
like
doodle when he was on the phone a lot.
yeah? Okay, so my
And
mom was also
and he
like
would
kind of
also,
abstract patterns, or
he would do a lot of that. And he
okay,
looked at a lot of like surf art and like trippy art, and he looked at like R. Crumb, and he looked
okay.
at like surf magazine, heavy metal magazine. Like he liked H.R. Giger, the alien designer dude. So like
He divided the he designed the xenomorph, right?
right,
Yeah.
yeah. And so there was actually there was actually a large print of H.R. Giger in my parents' bedroom. And it was a really trippy, weird thing to have in your parents' bedroom.
I'll say, yeah.
And like, I don't know. I think about like the art that was in the house on the walls and stuff sometimes.
You just brought back a memory of Sharper Image had a big, like I don't know if it was a xenomorph statue or a predator statue, but it makes sense that I'm conflating the two of them because they're like they're a franchise together. But
Yeah.
I always wondered who would have that in their house. But
Yeah,
did you guys have a?
It was another one of Giger's artworks because he like was an airbrush artist. He did like lots of art, lots of paintings and stuff.
I was gonna ask if you had like Sharper Image gear, but I guess I guess I was besmirching your parents' taste.
So yeah, the family was into art. My sister's a dancer. My brother does music. Not full time, but he throughout growing up he was into rapping, making his own instrumentals, and then played in a couple bands and stuff. So it's just been like it's a pretty supportive family as far as the arts.
Creative outlets. Yeah. I come from a very similar family where we almost had to choose different things so we wouldn't be stepping on each other's turf. You know? And I'm the one that ended up being a painter. But it's also funny because growing up, I used to look up at my brother's drawings and be like, oh, damn, these are good and I suck, you know?
Yeah.
Was that the kind of the feeling of like, you'll never, and I don't know what those drawings are anymore, but like in my mind, the lines were so clean and crisp, you know?
I was kind of the visual artist. Like, I guess I wasn't, but I think maybe with my dad, maybe I was like, oh man, he's really good at drawing. But my dad like worked just tons of different jobs. My mom was a registered nurse for her whole career, doing different aspects of that, and so they worked.
So when did you officially decide, like have you been identifying as an artist? Because I find like deciding that you're an artist is a kind of a pretty momentous task, you know?
Yeah.
Because at first you're like, you know, and there's such an art history to it that it can be hard to sort of just be like, okay, I am an artist. Like, was that an easy process for you? When did you, how old were you when that came about?
I was probably like 20.
20? Okay. Yeah.
19, 20. After high school, you get starting community college and taking a lot more art classes. I was taking a lot of ceramics classes at my community college.
For people that aren't familiar with the work, you mostly paint, from my understanding, or from what I see on Instagram. I don't know if you do other.
Yeah, I think that's mostly what I do right now. But I've always kind of dabbled in other things, like a little bit of sculpture, a tiny bit of animation. So those things, I've done a lot of ceramics. I kind of started, that was kind of one of the early processes that I really got kind of into. And I was going to say another factor of that, like deciding I was going to be an artist thing. I had kind of decided at community college, but another like different level of commitment, I think, happened when I was working for I got a job working for a ceramic artist as an assistant. Mm-hmm. And he like taught me a ton But one thing we did is we did an artist residency. He was invited to a residency in China, and we were there for 6 weeks. And I think like through him, especially at that time, meeting like lots of actual artists who were full-time artists. Like before that, I really hadn't met many, if any, like, I mean, I met teachers, and like some of them were also working artists, but
if they're teachers, they're not full-time artists. They have a day job.
Yeah. And so, and so it was like, that was eye-opening. And like, well, first him, like he was a working artist, and like just getting to observe that kind of like daily, this is how you make it work every day, and so that was like a different level of like committing, because I had kind of committed to saying I was going to be an artist, but I didn't really know what it was. And then I like learned what it was and what it took, and then I like did it again, kind of.
Yeah. No, that's so. Well, it's interesting you told me that, because I was going to ask you where you ended up going to school and if you have an MFA. I don't have an MFA, so I'm not asking with judgment on that. But what you just said is kind of relates to the episode that's out this week, which is kind of, they don't really teach that in school. So it's amazing that you got that opportunity to see that. Like, I think that a lot of artists that are doing well right now that I know kind of had that moment of sort of realizing like, oh, okay, no, I have to figure this out for myself. So so anyway, where did you go to school?
So yeah, I went to school, well, first at that community college, Allen Hancock College in Santa Maria, and then I went to Cal State Long Beach.
Oh, cool!
For my undergrad, and then I just,
how long ago? What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 2021.
Oh, okay. So that's a really good program. Do you know?
Great.
Do you know what's it called? Jacqueline Valenzuela and those people?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Jacqueline's
Cool.
a good friend. Yeah.
See, that's one of the things that happens with
I saw
with this show.
I watched the interview.
Well, thank you. No, but with this show, because like at first I thought you were part of like the LA people. Then I find out you were in Seattle, but then it turns out you are part of like the, you know, because you see who like follows who on Instagram, and you get these ideas, and then sometimes I randomly find out, like, I didn't know that that Cesar Lopez was in whatchamacallit, in Kansas City. So like it's always such a surprise, you know, and people's background. All right, so then you spent some time in the Long Beach area, and then you did probably the hustle of coming to LA. So that gives me an idea of what like kind of informed, because like I have a very big fondness for the Long Beach art scene. Like I'm one of the few people that is excited to go. I think I'm going down this weekend because someone, my friend Juan Gomez, who I've had on the show, and another person I've had on the show. I think of him as my friend, but I don't want to put that on him.
Right.
Christopher Anthony Velasco are down there. So anyway, I love that scene. Now I know where you fit into into my conception of the art world. So
yeah, it's a great community. I think all the people, they stick together and support each other in a real way. That's cool.
Yeah. So okay, so then tell me a little bit about the transition into. Have you gotten your MFA? I don't know how old you are. I might be being too hard on you, expecting you to even have it by now. No, you don't have to tell me how old, but are you thinking about doing that? Is teaching an interest to you?
Yeah, it is. I'm 31, and I just started an MFA at University of Washington.
Okay, so that's what brought you out to Seattle. Mm-hmm. Interesting. How are you finding it out there? I mean, I know you've only been there a month, so.
I'm liking it. Just trying to get, I think I'm finally getting a little bit of momentum. It was I was kind of all over the place studio-wise in the beginning, just trying to kind of get my bearings. I think learning that, like, moving it's kind of weird how much, I feel like for myself, how much my art I'm noticing was connected to a place,
Yeah.
and in general ways and in very specific ways. And so that's been kind of interesting, because I feel like it's kind of like that thing when you're in a new place. I just want to like stop and like look at everything and like paint what's around me or something. I don't know. I'm like trying to get to know it,
Your palette must be changing dramatically, I would imagine.
Well, like it could be, yeah.
I just say that because when I was studying, we had a visiting teacher called Barry Nemeth from Micah, and one of the things that's always stuck with me is that like when people go to Micah, they end up just painting this very specific brown kind of color that's only regional to the place. And when you were talking about it, I was like, I'm trying to think of what is like Long Beach colors, but it is a much more vibrant palette than I would imagine. Like even
Southern California in general.
It's like a very specific. And also one of the things, like I would even put the palettes available here at odds with those in Miami. Because Miami, for some reason, I don't know what it is. Maybe Miami just spends more paint year over year trying to keep things from fading. But over here, everything is just bleached by the sun. And that makes like very specific color palettes that I would not, you can't find that vibe.
Yeah.
Like, and when I'm in my, like I can almost like spot a place that was shot in Florida without even seeing the vegetation just based on the light. In Miami,
of the place,
so because that was one of the first things when I came to LA. I was like, oh, the light is like the movies. It felt like I was tripping. It was like a weird surreal thing of like it felt like being in one of those David Lynch movies like Mulholland Drive, where you're like all of a sudden in this like hyper realized place. But
it does have a unique character wherever you go. The light, and I'm pretty sensitive to that. But yeah, it's been good. And I think 2 years is, even though it's pretty short, like I think it's going to go by pretty fast. So, but it's cool. I have a friend up here who I went to school in Long Beach with, Dana Bloom. And, so like, it's nice to have somebody like that I go back with a little bit, and we can like get together and talk shop and stuff.
And then talk about and have a piece of home there, Because whenever I talk to Miami people, I'm like, oh, there's a sense of place in that is nice. Well, okay, so we talked a little bit about stuff off air, and I am kind of interested in the idea of metaphysics that you mentioned to me. What is that? What is that? That word is like supercharged for a lot of people. And so I always find it's helpful to specifically ask what a particular word that's that charged means to a person. But I'm like into spooky shit. So that's why I gravitate towards that. That down? Yeah. Metaphysics.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we could just cut this out and not address this at all.
No. Yeah. What's that mean again? Like non-physical, but still happens.
Yeah, and I think that my interest in it, I'm less of a ghost person, but more in an interdimensional Bigfoot kind of person. So,
but is it only ghost stuff, or is it like?
I think
it's like consciousness metaphysical.
Yeah,
I think it's like we don't really know where it is, but it's like.
I think anything that's non-scientific is like the physical sciences
can't be measured physically or something. Yeah. Well, I think I think that's a lot what art is kind of after, I would say. We're chasing this like something, but it's obviously not scientific, because then we'd just have a experiment and we'd have controlled variables, and we wouldn't be trying to make this thing appear and make people feel something. I think maybe that's why I wrote it down.
Oh, you don't have to stick to that. I just like that.
Yeah.
That's what popped out to me.
Yeah. I certainly think about the kind of absurdity of like our general consensus. I think, like if you look at like the Renaissance, they didn't know that they were seeing the world. They weren't like aware when they were born that they were seeing the world through a Christian lens, And I think when we're born, we're not aware that we're seeing the world through a physical, like, kind of fully automatic model of the universe where like we're just kind of like little victims in this like large like billiard balls, like that's the kind of like, I think it seems to me like that's the kind of like general, like people feel like that's the real truth in the bottom of their heart. But I think that's just because we were born in this time and place. Like I don't think we would have that like inner belief that this world is just physical if we weren't kind of raised that way. And so I think it's interesting to like think about that and how much we were just given that, or how much.
Well, it's also interesting how inescapable like some forms, like there are things that are inherently human, right? Like having unfounded beliefs seems to be a pretty big,
sure.
like even secular people, sometimes you listen to them talking and they are so like, I'm in LA, so spiritual, right? Like there's people that swear to God that they're like super, rational, and then they love horoscopes, or
that they're, I mean, science itself is, people hang on to it and want to believe it, just like people want to believe, like you can believe it, but people hang on to it like people hang on to religion or something. I mean,
no, for sure.
It's I think, but you're right about that will unfounded belief for sure. Well, it's necessary, I mean,
not to bring it. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's necessary. We have to have unfounded belief because we wouldn't.
It's just part of our chemistry.
We wouldn't get anywhere without it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, okay, so I've talked to people that are very deeply interested in abolition, right?
What?
Of like abolition movements in general.
Oh, okay.
Of like of police brutality, police state,
right.
kind of that in that realm. We don't have to get too deep into that. I'm just bringing it up because you said that it's almost necessary, and part of that, I think I'm specifically talking about the Black experience, people that have the Black American experience that I've interviewed on the show. Mm-hmm. They talk about abolition as a process of imagining, right? Like it is almost like, to some degree, you have to accept that the changes that you're going to be able to accomplish are very limited by the world that you live in and the realities, like power, especially in this case, the power structures are pretty embedded. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the work of abolition it lives in that like spiritual space of like imagining, it's metaphysical in that sense. It's like, but it's interesting. And then the other thing that to me is, like we're speaking specific, and I say this a lot on the show, but it's relevant to this conversation. I'm not just wedging it in, is the dogmatic approach to institutions where like, there's what is his name? I think there was a scientist. It's not Jacques Vallée. It's John Mack. So I've been listening to this podcast with Dave Foley is like now a big UFO guy from Kids in the Hall. Okay. So he has a podcast and he interviews people. So this guy wanted to study this metaphysical stuff that was happening, all this like interdimensional things and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And he got ostracized for it, but like he just went whole, like he was sincere in his trying to understand it. So there's an interesting thing that happens in that realm of like, and especially relevant now where there's so much disclosure talk going on. Like it just seems very much like the church also repressing information, you know? And
Yeah.
there is a benefit to studying that, and because one of the things that Jacques Vallée says is that like a lot of the things that we're interpreting now as UFOs were interpreted as religious experiences. So one of the things that Dave Foley, who is an avowed lifelong atheist, says is that like what he hates about getting into UFOs is that it sort of makes him have to reconsider religion and things that people experienced back in the day that became these biblical stories, but like were probably, similar interdimensional experiences that people could only verbalize with their understanding of the world. So I just find all of this stuff interesting. That's why I gravitated to metaphysics.
No, I think when I kind of reflect on it, my biggest thing is this, we don't know it. We just don't know a lot. We don't know everything for sure, and we hardly know anything. And so I think I see a lot this kind of like, I think I saw a program and it was called like The Universe Explained. And I was just
I've seen that
I just
one.
laughed. I was just like, what? I made like a cartoon about it and had like a guy pushing up his glasses, like debunked, like fact checked, like we can't. I think that's the absurdity that I'm like, it's kind of entertaining, but it's also kind of sad that we think that we know. It leaves no mystery, we tend. Yeah, it's weird. Nobody used to think that. Nobody used to think you could know the universe.
Yeah.
And now we think that.
No, and it's interesting, like we don't even know what we're doing sometimes and what we're opening up, because there's a lot of thought in academic circles about how like, it's it's the source of this is French postmodernism, but the idea that there is no inherent truth in the world is a very intellectualist idea that people swear by and apply it when it comes to sexuality and stuff like that. But you also open the door for people, for there not being like a logical reality in the way that the Enlightenment kind of determined
that's the
it.
problem with all this. If you like swing it super far one way, then it's like, it's like it's a crisis, and if you swing it too far the other way, it's a crisis. And you have to have some.
But both things can be true too, right? Like both things can be true. It can be true that there is an objective reality, an empirical reality, I think is the way that I've heard it referred to in the science circles, versus this more postmodern humanist part of the humanities approach to academic thought, right? Which is fascinating to me.
It can be more than one thing at once, and that gets us to painting as well. It can be more than one thing at once. I think that's one of my favorite things about painting, and I see that relationship to like life itself. This idea of like something that can happen all in front of you at an instant, and it's so many things at once. It's so interpretable, yet it's so real. It's there.
And you have Clement Greenberg's trying to quantify it, but then you have people using his rules like Stella to fucking tear down his arguments. It's just so fascinating. Like it's almost like arbitrary where you put the boundaries. So tell me about your work a little bit. Why do you like painting, and what do you like to paint about? Like what powers, like essentially what powers of creation do you get by being a painter that are specifically attractive to you? And what is it about what is it that you're trying to work on? Like that you're trying to work out with these tools?
Yeah. I like I really like the tradition of painting. I think that like when I think of a tradition, I think of like a way of being connected, a way of having a direct line to like a time or people of the past, and then also like people of the future or people of the present. I think that's kind of like a magic thing that like tradition can do, and like some kind of craft can do or art can do. So I think that's very special to me. And like by being connected to a tradition, I do like painting things, representations of. I like but I'm also a pretty like formally like driven person as well. And so there's always this kind of, I feel like there's sometimes a kind of tension between like a formal kind of abstraction and like represented motifs in my
Mm-hmm.
work. Um, I Yeah, I'm kind of like it, I'm in grad school, so of course it's all like up in the air at the moment because it's like
Yeah.
this is kind of what it's meant, for you to like kind of unwind all that and kind of see, clarify what you're really into. And um but yeah, that's a little bit. I don't know.
Well, I've seen. I think I kind of get a sense of what you're talking because I see it's representational stuff, but there's a lot of pattern work as well sometimes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then I think it's a way, I don't know, I like following, just learning, like I think a lot of my like time as an artist has been like, oh, this thing I've always wanted to do. Like I want to try that, like first it was like I took a painting class in community college and they taught us how to mix paints and like that was cool and we were making paintings in a building and I thought that was cool. But I felt like, oh, how do you like take this stuff outside and
Hmm.
like make a painting like like outdoors?
Yeah.
And so then it's like a different way of working. So you have to like figure out how to not make the paints all muddy and messy and like so like little incremental things like that where it's like, oh, I want to do that. I want to know how to do that. Or like how do you make an image from like sketches and
Hmm.
like how do you take something from like a pen drawing that you did at the beach to like a painting where it's like kind of fleshed out and part of this like composition. And like things like that kind of drive me sometimes, or sometimes like learning about technical things. I think
Hmm.
in that way I don't know, it's like that kind of just curiosity drives
Well,
me a
it
lot.
sounds like, especially when you were talking about your family, but it popped in my head that you grew up with people that were very appreciative of process, right, and enjoyed the experience of actually making stuff. That was maybe more like the inquiry at the time. But
Mm-hmm.
I understand that you're about to shake everything up and you don't know what your work is going to be about, like leaving grad school. So it's a little intimidating to talk about it as you're like on the precipice of that. But what have you been working on so that people can kind of get a visualized sense of where you're at now?
Yeah.
And then maybe I'll have you back on after grad school and we'll be like, oh yeah, I hate all those paintings because
Yeah.
that usually happens.
I think most recently I've had kind of like two like lines of work a little bit. I've had these like beach paintings that are kind of like an art, like my version of like an Arcadia, or like uh what's that other word of like this kind of paradise place.
What's Arcadia?
Arcadia was like a wooded area in like Greek mythology, I think. Don't quote me, but it was kind of like where it was kind of like an Eden, where
Hmm.
like people were just playing music and really peaceful and kind of like everything was good. And this kind of like, yeah, this kind of like idealistic little like paradise place. And I was kind of doing those, I was kind of using the beach as like a setting for different paintings where I'm trying to just get after like a feeling mostly.
Hmm.
um, like that kind of paradise, the end of that paradise, like the sunset,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
sunsetting of that like Arcadian experience, or that like Eden experience. Um, and then also like recently I did this like beach party scene that was inspired by a Titian painting that was like a Bacchanal, like
What
kind
is
of.
that word? You also had that on your list of things that you were thinking about. What is Bacchanal?
Bacchanal is like a drunken kind of like wine party where Bacchus, the god of wine, I guess he like sails in and just like gets everybody drunk. I don't I don't really know like all the specifics, but it's there's a lot of depictions of this like
Debaucherous parties.
Yeah, these debauchery, the baby like peeing and like the people like laying out naked and drunk dancing, playing music, carrying on. And I was just like, I always see these paintings and I don't know, like, what were these people like of like, you kind of hear these like art historian reasons why they painted these paintings and stuff, like, but then you just kind of wonder about the artists themselves, and their experience with that kind of debauchery and stuff. And so
I mean, it is a cliche, the bohemian, right?
Yeah. So I was kind of thinking about that and like that cliche and that, those stories and like, what's the closest for me in my experience of like that kind of just like people outdoor, like partying and stuff. And for me, it was like going to the beach and like partying with friends like all day and stuff, like bringing a bottle of tequila out there or something. And so I just wanted to make a painting that was like very local. It was like I was going to show it in my hometown just before I left up here. And so I wanted like people to like kind of point things out, like little, what do you call it? Like little secret, not secret, but little things that only like the kind of locals would recognize. But then also just have it based on this kind of historic painting. So I like stole a little part of a composition from Titian and then like added some figures in around from my own and like put it in a local scene. And so there's these kind of like fun celebratory works like that. And then I also have these ones that are like, I've been working on these ones of a dog chasing its tail. And they're kind of more like...
Does it ever go full Ouroboros and bite it?
It hasn't yet. They're more about the chase and this kind of like all the things, all the like allegories that could be kind of like about ambition or overworking or like this balance between like, is it fun or is it like addictive and kind of like gonna be bad for your health kind of thing. And those all came from listening to George Clinton, Atomic Dog, and like listening to his little monologue in the beginning, and where he's like, a dog that chases its tail will be dizzy. And then he like starts talking about like these are rapping dogs, rhythmic dogs, dancing dogs, house dogs, street dogs. And I just started getting all these visuals, listening to that song. It's an amazing song. And that's kind of what started that. But I think there's this kind of like some paintings that are kind of like bound up and some paintings that are really like open and free and like kind of almost like a kind of psychedelic transcendent kind of thing. Like, so it's like, I feel like there is this kind of play with those two things, like freedom or like liberation or like, and then kind of like bound up, psychologically bound up or something.
Are they when you say about these terms, I definitely see like the dog chasing its tail sort of being the bound up, but is there also a visual representation of that binding, or is it more conceptual?
No, it happens sometimes through like the structure of the painting, like it's sometimes a little based on like some kind of structure or grid, and sometimes it gets really rigid to where like or like really pushing against like the boundaries of the frame or something. There's like formal things that kind of sometimes feel kind of tight, whereas some things feel a lot more like open, airy. So
I'm also hearing, it's funny when you listen to someone talk like for an hour, you start to pick up things, the traditions. Like, I mean, how long have people been painting like Greek mythology themed or going for their, so I like that, that, and then there's also you're drawing from like music. It's an interesting relationship like to painting that you have itself, right? And then the thinking about the history thing of like the past and then the future is like, what are people going to be relating to And because I mean, I feel like I'm not reading too much into it, but I think that the debauchery is like a very American kind of,
Yeah.
it's the excess. It's like a very, and we model ourselves after that democracy stuff. So there's a lot in that, in just that simple act of continuing that tradition, right? It changes context as you're doing stuff. And I think that, I wonder how much, like, I don't know, because we don't really have recordings of like Renaissance music and stuff like that, but I wonder how much musical inspiration and lyrical inspiration was a thing, or if that's more of a modernist, postmodernist. You think so?
It's hard to say, I guess.
Do you know of any documented, like, oh, I was inspired by this work? Like,
the oldest thing, I don't know. I was just reading the Journal of Delacroix, which is not that old. It's romantic, but he was
what period? What period is the Romantic period?
It's like
what's the dates?
It's early or late 17, early 1800s, I think.
If you're close enough, man, like that's good enough for the show.
1825 kind of time. And he was talking about like how he reading literature. He's like, oh, I should write more poetry because it's so like it gets like the ideas going, or like when I read poetry or when I listen to Mozart or stuff. He like was friends with he knew Chopin. Delacroix and stuff. So you brought up Chopin earlier.
Off the episode, but we were talking about Debussy.
Yeah. Yeah. So at least I know, like, I mean, that was a thing that I was reading that was a little older, where there was definitely like, oh yeah, like poetry and literature. But I can't, I imagine that's always been the cross pollen. I don't see why it wouldn't be.
Yeah. No, definitely. No, it is, as opposed to something like photography, which has a much shorter history. When you get into these really older styles of like even like the fact that people forgot how to paint for a while, like in the Dark Ages. That's the whole point of the quote unquote the Renaissance, right? Like,
I mean, that's what they.
I always I had a student I wasn't the teacher. I had a peer of mine, Seth Wiener, and we were in art school in Florence, and we were being taught about how like Giotto was the first person to ever paint sculpturally, and he was so mad. He was like, "Oh yeah, the first person ever. How do you know? How do you know?" And that always, like, I was like, it was just so funny because it was so nitpicky. But he was like so skeptical, but like, he's probably right. Like maybe somebody else has done it before. And then later on I realized like, oh yeah, they did it in the classical period.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, that thing of like forgetting how to paint, a lot of that, I think it was like a choice to forget,
Yeah.
And like, it's interesting actually, when you look at like that kind of canon of like how they made those figures in like the Gothic or medieval, and like with the tiny head and the giant bodies and stuff, and like how that came about, and like that stuff's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also funny because like maybe it was a style choice, right? Instead of just ignorance.
No, I think that's the misunderstanding. Yeah, I think a lot of it is a choice, or a lot of it was a choice. It was kind of like, I don't know a ton about it, but I do think it was pretty. It wasn't totally like, oh, we just can't do this kind of thing. It wasn't just facility, I don't think.
Yeah. Okay, and then I guess I kind of want to ask you a little bit about.
Ask me anything, man.
I'll lead into this. Like, I know that there's a lot of resentment towards religion out here in the U.S. and all of that. But we're talking about painting, and having grown up in a place like Italy where it was a time like all of this religious stuff was happening at a time where people were kind of isolated. That they didn't science. People still believed in the divine right of kings. Just for context, right?
Yeah.
What I find really interesting and moving about all of that stuff is like you will be in places like hilltop cities, like Assisi, and you will feel the devotion, like right, like the and it's this romantic sense of like there's an element of surrender to it and all of that, which is why when you mentioned like the idea of the artist as a monk, the isolation, the devotion there, that's the romance I think that is really interesting in painting. I wanted to hear your thoughts and maybe flesh that idea out a little bit, because I understand the resistance. Like, yeah, the church was a very powerful in this institution. It continues to do a lot of harm to people in certain senses, right? Like, I would say that the church is not an all powerful entity anymore, but there is enough of a community that evangelicalism pushes them to kind of promote or to support ideas that people that are more akin to us would be resistant to, right? But separating that element, right? But just like the sheer like experience of belief and all of that, that romance to me is very, very like when I'm in those spaces, I can feel it, and like I'm like, oh, I kind of get it,
I know what you mean, and I think
go ahead.
So there's a reason why we feel that in those spaces, and it has to do with their understanding of the world. I think that's what made them capable, in a sense, that's what made them capable of designing those spaces. Because, like, think about what people are developing now in the US. Like, when I look around, what I see being developed is like things done as cheaply as possible, as big as possible, to make the most amount of profit as possible in the next 40 years. They don't really care much beyond that.
Yeah.
So because this comes from the difference in their understanding of the world. Like, if you think of the world as it starts when I'm born and it ends when I'm dead, then you're gonna just want to maximize your profits and comfortability so that you can, build that apartment and rent it out to 100 people and then make your money and retire at 40 so that what can you do after that? You can travel to Rome and Florence and Paris and see all these great majesties, see all these great things. And it's like if you look at that, like, why were they doing that? It's they knew that they didn't start when they were born. They had their ancestors, and they didn't end when they died. They had their descendants, and they knew that their existence went through all of that. They believed that, and they knew that, and it really a lot more true than this idea that we're just here and then we're gone. If you
they also were believed that they didn't end when they died.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like that they went somewhere else and there was a reckoning there, and that's so which is also interesting because I say this all the time when you go to art school over there and they started explaining to you like, oh, that's this guy's face and that's this guy, and people were literally paying to have their faces painted into chapels, into old religious stories.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to get into heaven. Well, it's like the stock market for your retirement after you die.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, like they're going along. Yeah, and who in their right mind would invest everything they had into something that grand if they didn't, believe that, or so so it makes sense, and but it's also like, because of that effort and because of that design and intention that was put into those spaces, you feel
Yeah.
that, like, you it comes through. And like, or when you look at those paintings, you look at, I mean, I went to Europe like a year and a half ago, and I just saw, I went to a lot of city centers and museums, and saw so many pictures of like the crucifixion and all these religious paintings. And like, I started to like feel it, like, it was like, holy shit. Like, I don't know if I get it, but I like feel like I'm getting it, kind of
Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
without no like words and stuff. Like, it's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's the power. Like, it is also propaganda. It is
And
why they believe it. So
Yeah.
it is this like belief perpetuating belief. And you, by the way, you're not the first person I also had somebody, Nick Lowe was on the show, and he was like, I think I get the crucifixion. It's such a weird thing, though.
Well, and that's what they were made for, right? They were
Yeah,
made
yeah.
for people who couldn't read and stuff. Like,
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
like, so yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I remember I had a woman that is pretty religious. She's non-denominational, which is the church that's like cool with gay people and all that. Like, I think they have, but it was interesting because I was telling her the story of like, when I realized what church actually was, instead of just being bored, I was like, oh, this guy tells you stories. It's like it's almost like YouTube reaction videos where they'll like watch something and then react to it and then put their spin on it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, this is like
That's
literally
a funny comparison. It is kind of like that.
but but much more with a bigger flair for the dramatic and within a much more refined kind of, but it really is a fascinating thing. Like, I think that like, like people out here are so like pro secular, and I'm like, there have been some pretty bad secular societies, like kind of ones that we call out all the time, like the Soviet Union, like, and then, but we're like, no. We've transcended all of these like human, it's almost like, whether or not like the context hasn't really changed that much, people are still hysterical about things and whatnot. I
feel people coming around a little bit though, and I think that we have really good opportunities to learn and gain what we can. I feel like we have a lot of opportunities to learn and gain things from like indigenous knowledge that's, finally being a little more respected, and like, I think there's a lot of ways that we can like try to come back and balance our world a little bit. Yeah, have hope.
No, I definitely think that I think that there is like a contingent of people that's so caught up in their algorithm, left or right, that they think the world is falling apart, and then there's the rest of us who are just like,
what? Yeah, it's pretty wild.
You guys are worried about the weirdest stuff, but it is. I'm with you. I definitely think that there is a lot, and I think that even the fact that I can say this publicly, like, I think that there is something to humanity that makes the sense of dogmatic belief kind of almost inescapable, and the only healthy way to address it is to sort of be like, I guess I'm like thinking of chaos magic now, but it's like, is this belief serving you? Like, or is it sabotaging you? Yeah. But cool, man. Well, I really appreciate this. Anything that we haven't hit that maybe I didn't ask you about that you were like in preparation thinking like, oh yeah, I want to mention this. It's okay if it's complete non sequitur. And it's okay if you don't have one. I just like to give people the opportunity, because I know sometimes people prepare, and I don't want to.
No, there were some things along the way. Like when you mentioned Jacqueline, I just wanted to say like that it was like, yeah, I know her well, and it was cool. We got to work together. She was in a show that I organized and curated in Solvang.
Oh, nice.
In earlier in the summer.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a group show with five of us. Luis Ramirez, Jacqueline Valenzuela, Narciso Martinez, and Priscilla Sandra Flores. And that was like so much fun talking about like the Long Beach like family. It was like to connect all those. We all graduated at different times, but like knew each other through like various means. So that was really special. And yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
Well, tell me a little bit about your scene. Oh, sorry, go. You had another thing.
No, and just like, I don't know, I always just feel grateful for like all the people, all the community, and like that's supportive, and that like it makes it possible. It's really hard, like you say, like that kind of monk life, that kind of painter like solitude is really difficult, but it makes it okay when you like know that like other people are, when you get to talk to other people who are doing it and appreciate it. So I just want to like shout out to like everybody who.
Yeah. Well, now that I know you guys are like kind of studied around the same programs and stuff, like you guys, your work doesn't look the same, but one of the things that I noticed, because I'm very much interested in patterns, like I'm obsessed with them lately, is that you guys are both working with realism and patterns that tie into it. She's doing more lowrider stuff. You're kind of doing some really interesting. I think even the diamond pattern. I mean, I guess it's just called the diamond pattern. Is interesting to me because it does kind of harken back to these traditions of painting, right? Like you do have some sort of maybe more psychedelic things intertwined in there, but there are some like. That's what I'm interested in most right now is like recognizable historical patterns like chevrons, you know, all of those things. And I really think that you do an interesting thing because it gives it this like, especially there's one painting with two people in bathing suits. I think it does. I see how there's a looseness to it, but it also kind of ties in, it adds that historical element. You know, like it's contemporary people with so you guys do a similar thing with patterns, but very different, you know, like hers is much more contemporary. You use it much more to harken back to different things and kind of keep it within that tradition of painting, which I think is awesome. I do enjoy your work, and this is like low key becoming a promotion for Long Beach's program because like every time I have someone on, like I just end up hyping it up. So, you know, but there's a lot of you guys doing well.
I watched all those Elmer, Tita,
Yeah, but I mean, you guys are selling me on it, so I definitely want to acknowledge that has been a pretty fruitful program. Anything that we can promote for you? Your Instagram for starters.
Yeah, it's Oscar Pearson _. And I can't actually, you know, since I just started grad school, there's not a whole lot coming up for me right now, but
academic prison, as Jacqueline put it.
You can follow me or something. Stay tuned on there.
Can I on our way out, can I ask you, is there a big scene? Because you said you did a show in those in the Ojai area. Is there an art scene in Ojai that we can get like a little rundown on?
Yeah, so in the San Ynez Valley, that was at this museum called the Elverhoy Museum. It's actually like it's an art museum / Danish history museum.
Oh, cool.
And but the art scene there is I'd say it's pretty much like local, like what do you call it when there's just pretty pictures of things that would appeal to that kind of locale, you know.
So like more touristy,
my hometown, like beachy kind of things.
Yeah.
That was one of the things with the beach paintings was like, I want to make beach paintings, but the challenge of like making beach paintings being from the beach and not having it be like seashells on it, you know, like So that's another thing about that. But no, I don't think there's a whole lot. There's some really good arts education though, and I think there could be. It's really expensive though to live there in the San Ynez Valley. But hey, I mean, I do know some people, so I think the Elverhoy has a new director, and she's really open to some really interesting ideas. So I think there could be more to come there.
Cool. Yeah. No, that's that. I like up and coming scenes. All right, man. Well, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Javier.
I imagine you may. Do you ever come back to LA?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll be back. I'll be actually down there in December.
Cool.
Like 12 through 15 or something.
Cool. Well, I decided not to go to Miami this year because I can go any time of the year, and it's nice to go when I can use the beach. So, that's the other thing. I don't mean to throw shade, but I'm also from a beach town, and your beach town sucks by comparison. I'm kidding. I mean, I'm not. I prefer Miami beaches to like California beaches, but to each their own.
I've
it's
never
your
been.
home.
I'd love to visit.
I think the only beaches that I've ever been to that blow the fuck out of Miami beaches is in the Philippines. I've never seen. It's the calmest water. I mean, if you're a surfer, it sucks, but it's the calmest water and it's the clearest water, and the sand is so fine that they can put a comb through it and it'll like leave a trail. Like you could like people do sand art all the time for the tourists and stuff, but it is idyllic, but the rest of the place, it's not like going to a resort town. It's not like going like, you know, the streets aren't as finished. It doesn't have that like bubblegum feel that Miami does, but I loved it out there.
Yeah, a lot of beaches to explore still.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, thank you for doing the show. And if you guys enjoyed the conversation, like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars wherever you listen. We are at What's My Thesis. Ugh, I keep fucking this up because I haven't done it in years. If you'd like to join our Patreon, go to whatsmythesis.patreon.com. And thank you guys for checking us out, and we'll be back next week with another guest and another topic that may or may not be art related.